Everybody, welcome on this Memorial Day week day. It's Monday. It still feels like the weekend because it's a day off, right? I don't have a day off, but I know a lot of people do. So, yeah. So today I'm going to be starting our new YouTube series where I read from this book. And then we have a little bit of discussion if people want to make comments or ask questions or whatever. I will not be able to put anything up on the screen, so you'll just be hearing my lovely voice. But I'll be looking up and seeing if anybody has any questions while I'm reading, and I'll pause and answer some questions the best that I can. Hey Maggie, I'm sorry to hear that your trip was rained out. That really is a bummer. Yeah, that sucks. I'm sorry. Hopefully you guys can go at a later time. And hey, I do not recall. Good to see you too. So, yeah, I've been working over the weekend. I normally have Friday, Saturday, and Sunday off, but I work Saturdays and Sundays now due to short staffing issues. But I don't know. I work during the day on. I keep remembering. I need to remember. And sometimes I work during the day on Saturdays and Sundays, but I've been working nights the last few times. I normally work nights in general, but yeah, they like to get me all mixed up on my days. But anyway, the only reason why I mention that is that there might be a Saturday and Sunday or where I can't do a live or whatever. But I keep remembering this is a Monday thing now. This is a Monday thing. And I should be able to do Mondays. But anyway, I digress. I think I'm just rambling on, waiting if anybody else pops in, but it doesn't look like it. So I'm just going to go ahead and start. So they have it by parts, and then each chapter is broken down into parts. So like, I think we're just going to be reading through part 1 today, which is 3 chapters, and they're very small chapters. So, and then next Monday we can get to part 2, and then maybe get 3 or 4 chapters in that one, and then yeah. So it's definitely going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 11, maybe 11 or 12 parts, 11 or 12 videos to this. So, but I'll be playing it by ear as far as how long I'll go to, because I don't think it'll take me that long to read through these 3 chapters, because there's barely 20 pages. But I think that'll be good for starting off today. Anyway, so I'll just jump right in. So this is part 1, false confession basics. Chapter 1, Brendan Dassey's confession. And I will say also this is page 3, just in case you guys do have the book and you want to read along with me. Page 3. All right, Brendan Dassey's confession. By most accounts, Brendan Dassey was a quiet, shy, learning disabled 16-year-old kid with a low IQ and bad grades. When he wasn't in school, he liked to play video games and watch professional wrestling. Granted, he wasn't setting the world on fire, but neither was he causing any problems. He had never been in any trouble or had any meaningful police contacts before October 31st, 2005, the day that Teresa Hallback disappeared after visiting Stephen Avery's property to photograph a vehicle. As viewers of Making a Murderer know, Hallback's body was eventually found on Avery's property. She had been shot in the head and her corpse was burned. There were no physical evidence or eyewitnesses that linked Dassey to the crime. Yet within a few months, Dassey confessed that he and his uncle Stephen had raped and murdered the victim and then placed her body in the fire. It's not easy to figure out exactly what Dassey confessed to doing. It's harder. Sorry. Where was I? It's not easy to figure out exactly what Dassey confessed to doing. It's harder to still determine when he confessed to doing it. Dassey was interrogated by detectives multiple times, including on November 6, 2005, in the back of a squad car. So that's when he was first interrogated, was November 6, 2005, in the back of a squad car. On February 27th, Mishicot High School, and then again on February 27th at Two Rivers Police Department. Later, still on February 27th at a hotel, which is Fox Hills, but we don't have any records other than Fassbender and Wiegert wrote out a police report. We don't have any transcripts of what was said during those. We have audio recording and transcripts of the other ones, but not Fox Hills, so God knows what actually happened at Fox Hills. Anyway, that's just a side note. On March 1st at the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department and on May 13th at the Sheboygan County Law Enforcement Center. All of these interrogations, except for the questioning at the hotel, were either audio or video recorded and are cited in this book. And then it has a citation right here. So if I go to the back of the book, and it says chapter 1, and then I go to number 1. The interrogation transcripts include errors in informal dictation by the speakers, such as the investigators' frequently use of ta in place of the word to. I have preserved most of these errors for the purpose of authenticity. In addition to, however, there are transcript errors, including misspelled words and omitted punctuation marks. I have taken the liberty of correcting obvious transcription errors to improve ability. Towards this end, the eclipse ... used in this book indicate material in a transcript has been omitted from the questions ellipsis that appear in the original transcript are typically ignored. Also, for the purpose of readability, I sometimes change a capital letter to lowercase and vice versa without using brackets. Readers can find the original transcripts of Dassey's interrogations at, and then there's that StephenAveryCase.org, police interviews and interrogations, which is still a running website. So if you guys want to ever look at these, I know I have most of Brendan's in our Discord, and then Foul Play also has it in their website, which is foulplay.site. So there's different places you guys can look up for these transcripts if you wish to. We did a live on the one from the school, February 27th one, and then another one on the other February 27th one when he was at the police department, somewhere in our videos here. Anyway, the version, so now I'm back to page 3, original text. The version of the confession that the state used to convict Dassey is roughly as follows. On Halloween of 2005, the day Hallback disappeared, Dassey had been in school. When his school bus dropped him off, he started to walk up the road towards his home. Also, I should say this is trigger warning. If anybody it's pretty graphic what I'm about to read, which we all know from Dassey's, Brendan's course confession. If you guys are already aware of it, I'm just letting you know it's pretty trigger warning. So it's trigger warning. Anyway, I just wanted to say that. When his school bus dropped him off, he started to walk up the road towards his home, one of the several trailers on the Avery property. As he walked, he looked over to his Uncle Stephen's trailer and saw Hallback's Jeep-like vehicle, a RAV4, parked in the garage. Hallback and Avery were nowhere to be seen. Dassey went home, but a short time later he came back outside, and that's when he heard screams coming from inside Avery's trailer. Dassey approached the trailer and knocked on the door. It took a while, but his Uncle Stephen answered and invited him in. As prosecutor Ken Kratz enjoyed saying, Avery was all sweaty and full of sweat. Avery informed Dassey that he had Hallback chained up in his bedroom and was in the middle of raping her. He invited Dassey to join in the crime, and the two of them discussed their next steps over a soda in Avery's kitchen. Hey, Mose. After Dassey drank his beverage, the two went back to Avery's bedroom, where Dassey saw Hallback restrained on the bed, still pleading to be released. The 16-year-old boy, who had never had sex before, accepted Avery's invitation to sexually assault the prisoner. Avery watched, and then Dassey was through. He congratulated him, telling the boy, "That's how you do it." Once the sexual assault was completed, the two adjourned to another room where they watched a little television and mulled over their next move. Soon after, Avery got a knife and stabbed Hallback in the stomach. He then gave knife to Dassey, who cut her throat. However, Hallback survived, so Avery manually strangled her. But Hallback still wouldn't die, so they carried her out of the now bloody trailer into the garage. Because she survived the stabbing, throat slashing, and manual strangulation, Avery ramped up his efforts. He got his rifle and shot her 10 times, Dassey said, finally putting her out of her misery. Avery and Dassey then put Hallback's body in the back of her RAV4, but only temporarily. They soon took her body out of the vehicle and put it in the bonfire that Avery had already started before Dassey arrived. To dispose of Hallback's car, they drove it to the very edge of the Avery property and placed it high up on the ridge. At that time, Avery went under the hood of the SUV for reasons unknown to Dassey. The two then placed some tree branches on the vehicle in a half-hearted attempt to conceal it. Avery and Dassey walked back to the scene of the crime, where they cleaned up the garage and burned Hallback's clothing. At this time, Dassey also saw that Avery had placed the contents of Hallback's purse, or at least her camera and cell phone, into a nearby burn barrel. The two then went inside Avery's trailer, where Avery put Hallback's now famous RAV4 key into his dresser drawer. According to the state, Dassey had no problem living in his crime, at least for a while, but eventually the guilt gnawed away at him. His young relative, Kayla Avery, told investigator Mark Wiegert that Dassey was crying a lot and had lost weight. This pointed Wiegert to fellow investigator Tom Fassbender in Dassey's direction, resulting in multiple interrogations that produced Dassey's eventual convoluted confession. But there were several problems with the state's confession evidence. First, much of it seemed implausible on its face. Second, when diving into the details, the story seemed even less plausible, even impossible. Third, a much bigger problem was that Dassey's tale was contradicted by all of known physical evidence in the case. Fourth, the story was even self-contradictory in it changed on major points from 1 minute to the next. And fifth, the biggest problem of all, is that Dassey didn't actually provide details that made up the confession. Rather, his interrogators provided them and eventually convinced Dassey to agree. How can this be? The answer on some level is simple. Wiegert and Fassbender interrogated Dassey using strategies and tactics and tricks that are known, though perhaps not by them, to produce false confessions, particularly when used on young, learning, disabled, and highly compliant children. The book of this book, parts 2 and 3, will use plain English to expose and explain these tricks for the interrogation trade. It is Important to keep in mind that these are indeed tricks of the trade. That is, Wiegert and Fassbender interrogated Dassey the way most police investigators are trained to interrogate their suspects. And what happened to Dassey happens to others, including many adults, on a regular basis in Wisconsin and throughout the country. But before we start exploring interrogation tactics and false confessions, the next chapter discusses just how lucky Dassey is to have been able to mount a meaningful challenge to his conviction. If Hallbeck had disappeared just a few months earlier, even if everything else had played out as it did, Dassey would have no shot whatsoever at winning his freedom. Isn't that a chilling sentence? This book was written, by the way, in let's see when this book was written. 2018. I say it's chilling because Brendan's still in prison now. But the author of this book has such high hopes that, and I do too, so I'm not downing it, but just have so high hopes that his confession will be what frees him, basically, because it was recorded. But unfortunately, as we learned, the Supreme Court threw it out. But that doesn't mean we still can't use it for educational purposes, right? Also, for chapter 1 and 2, or for chapter 1, I missed the bullet point notes for 2 and 3. This version paraphrases Ken Kratt's opening statement in Dassey's jury trial and also incorporates some additional elements from the interrogation transcripts. Ken Kratt's pretrial press conference, where he rendered the now famous dramatic reading of the alleged confession, is discussed in chapter 21, so we'll be getting to that. For a parody of Ken Kratt's overdramatic press conference, where he overused the word sweat, some variation, therefore, see Axeltron Ken Kratt's press conference, extra sweaty edition. And then there's this one, YouTube. Hold on. He links a YouTube. Hold on. Let's see. Ken Kratt's press conference, extra hold on. See if it pops up. There we go. All right.
We have now determined what occurred sometime between 3:45 p.m. And 10 or 11 p.m. on the 31st of October. 16-year-old Brendan Dassey, who lives next door to Stephen Avery in a trailer, returned home on the bus from school about 3:45 p.m. He retrieved the mail and noticed one of the letters was full of sweat, was for his uncle, Stephen Avery. As Brendan approaches a sweaty trailer, as he actually gets several hundred feet away from the trailer, a long, sweaty way from the trailer, Brendan already starts to hear the sweat. As Brendan approaches the trailer, he hears louder screams for help, recognizes it to be of a female individual, and he knocks on Stephen Avery's sweaty trailer door. Brendan says that he knocks at least 3 times and has to wait until the person he knows as his uncle, who is partially dressed, who is full of sweat, opens the sweaty door and greets his sweaty nephew. Brendan accompanies his sweaty 43-year-old uncle down the sweaty hallway to Stephen Avery's sweaty bedroom. And there they find Teresa Halbach, sweaty and full of sweat. The evidence that we've uncovered establishes that sweaty Avery at this point was full of sweat.
The horror of how Teresa Halbach died, painted by a 16-year-old boy, couldn't keep his terrible secret any longer.
Oh my God, that was ridiculous. The fact that I just put it in the chat. I'm sorry. The fact that this professional man just linked that into the book. This professional doctor man, I don't know if he's a doctor, this professional man who studies this stuff linked that YouTube in this book. Oh man, you can't make, what part was that? 3. Where was that at? Where was that? Hold on. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, okay. During that whole Avery was all sweaty and full of sweat, and then he has number 3 there. Yep, and he linked that in his book. Oh, he's an attorney. He's an attorney with a sense of humor. I like that. Okay. I feel bad for laughing at that, but also that was pretty funny. All right. Chapter 2. Page 7. Chapter 2, From Box to Glass House. Interrogations play a big role in many juvenile and adult criminal cases. In most parts of the country, particularly outside of the big cities, such as Milwaukee and Chicago in the Midwest, no case is too small for police to pursue to ends of the earth. And when the police don't have any evidence, they will often bring their target into the interrogation room to create that evidence. For the first 2 years of my criminal defense practice, I primarily represent adult defendants charged with the misdemeanors, as many of those cases involved confessions. But back in those days, the early 2000s, in Kenosha, Wisconsin, interrogations were not recorded, and I quickly noticed a problem. First, the police reports said that my clients had admitted to crimes with which they were now charged. But then, when I was able to meet with my clients, they would either deny having confessed or would admit to saying some things to the police that weren't true. The client's specific reasons for falsely confessing or quasi-confessing were that varied as the interrogator's tactic. More on those later. However, the client's explanations all boiled down to this. Inside that small windowless interrogation room, the detectives had somehow convinced them that if they just admitted some form of wrongdoing, that they would be better off and they would maintain their innocence. Sometimes the interrogators hinted that if the suspects confessed, he would be able to put all of it behind him and leave the police station sooner. Others interrogators suggested that if the suspect confessed, the prosecutor would go easy on him down the road. People who confess are always treated more fairly, but if you play hardball with me now, they'll always play hardball with you later. I soon learned that this reassurance was false. When plea bargaining on behalf of one of my earliest clients, I pointed that out before I had been retained. The client was cooperative with the police and confessed. The prosecutor responded, "Well, that was stupid of him." Other interrogators had promised that if the suspect confessed, the judge would learn of this cooperation and things would go much more favorable for him in court. What they didn't say, of course, is that if the suspect simply remained silent, there often wouldn't be any court for him to go to. And sometimes, if interrogators had reason to believe the suspect was religious, they would even invoke God. You don't want to lie when God is watching you, do you? I never understood the appeal of that argument. Assuming the suspect brought into the premise, when would God not be watching? But regardless of the inducement, in each case, the interrogator convinced the suspect that things would be much, much worse if he continued to deny guilt. After all, the interrogator would say, "What would you do? What you did isn't that bad. It's lying about it afterwards that will get you into trouble. It's always better to be honest, and by denying this, you're not being honest." So, what did the defense lawyer in the early 2000s do with this information from the client? First, the lawyer could file a motion arguing that the confession was not voluntary and therefore is not admissible in trial, because many cases are built on little evidence, other than the confession. A defense win at this stage means the prosecutor would be left with nothing and would dismiss the case. But here's how the motion hearing invariably played out. On one hand, the defendant would testify and try his best to explain to the judge why he confessed. For example, rather than confessing voluntarily, he did so because the interrogator promised to let him go home. This inducement, of course, is usually a lie. Sometimes the suspect will be arrested despite the promise. Other times the allegation is incredibly minor and the suspect is going to be released anyway, later to be served with a summons and complaint. But it's almost unimaginable that the suspect would be released because he confessed. On the other hand, the interrogator would testify and deny having made such promises. This testimony would sound like the same broken record every time. "I just told the suspect, now the defendant, that I only want the truth," and then he confessed. Given these conflicting versions of events, which way do you think the court would rule? Would the elected trial judge shun the police detective and rule for a criminal? Or would the judge simply accept whatever came out of the detective's mouth? Even the Supreme Court of Wisconsin eventually concluded the result was often credible contrast between law enforcement officials and the accused, which law enforcement officials invariably win. Once the trial judge rubber-stamped the defendant's confession as voluntary and therefore admissible at trial, option number 2 for the criminal defense lawyer was to argue to the jury that the confession was not reliable, a legal distinction discussed later. In other words, the goal was to demonstrate for the jury that the confession was false and the defendant was innocent. Once again, it came down to credibility battle. On one hand, the jury could side with the defendant. This is a person that typically has little education, no public speaking experience, with which to persuade the jury, and a criminal record, something that the jury usually hears about if the defendant testifies, and sometimes even if he doesn't. And there's a number 2 here, but we'll read that at the end. On the other hand, jury could side with the detective, a polished, trustworthy, semi-professional witness who had simply invited the defendant to the police station where he questioned him in an interview room and asked him merely to tell the truth. For obvious reasons, the detective would never admit that he brought the defendant to the police station where he interrogated him in an interrogation room until he confessed in exchange for promises of leniency. Given these choices, which way do you think the jury would go? Verdict: we, the jury, find the defendant guilty. The problem, of course, is that while all confessions are persuasive to jurors, not all of them are true. For the time period of which I'm referring, again, the early 2000s, this is all we defense lawyers had to work with. The interrogation room was a black box. There was no tape recorder or camera, no way to see inside. We were left to fight a battle we were doomed to lose before it even began. The defense lawyer may as well have been stepped into the cage or a ring with a professional fighter. The odds of winning were about the same. Then, on July 7, 2005, just a few months before Halbach went missing, the law changed. In this case, State versus Jarrell CJ. Jarrell challenged his confession in court of appeals. Like Dassey, Jarrell was a teenager with a low IQ, bad grades, who was interrogated without a parent or lawyer present. The interrogation went as follows. At 9:10 a.m., Detective Spann advised Jarrell of his Miranda rights. The detectives then began to question Jarrell. Jarrell denied his involvement. The detectives challenged his denial and encouraged Jarrell to be truthful and honest. Jarrell again denied his involvement. The detectives again challenged this denial. During the questioning, Jarrell was afforded food and bathroom breaks. In the interrogation room, Detective Spano said Jarrell started opening up about his involvement and everyone else's somewhere between 1 and 1:30 p.m. Does any of this sound familiar? Substitute Brendan for Jarrell, and the above paragraph could easily describe any one of Brendan's multiple interrogations. As much like the court in Dassey's case, this court sided with the state. However, it issued a warning that was much stronger than much of its usual empty condemnations, whether police or prosecutors misbehaved. It is this court's opinion that it is time for Wisconsin to tackle the false confession issue. We need to take appropriate action so that the youth of our state are protected from confessing to crimes they did not commit. We need to find safeguards that will balance necessary police interrogation techniques to ferret out the guilty against the need to offer adequate constitutional protections to the innocent. The case was then accepted for review by Supreme Court of Wisconsin, something it would later refuse to do in Dassey's case. There, Jarrell's lawyers asked the court to find that this confession was coerced and also offered a solution for the future cases. Make the police record their interrogations. The lawyers argued that because it is difficult to accurately recreate months later in a courtroom what transpired in a lengthy interrogation, an electronic recording would provide courts with the best evidence from which it can determine, under totality of the circumstances, whether a juvenile's confession is voluntary. Not surprisingly, the government opposed such a rule, challenging the state Supreme Court legal authority to implement the proposed reform and further arguing that the court should not intrude on how the police conduct their business. In an unusual pro-defendant opinion, Wisconsin's High Court rejected the prosecutor's arguments. Plainly, this court has authority to adopt rules governing the admissibility of evidence, and that's exactly what it did. We exercise our supervisory power to require that all custodial interrogation of juveniles in future cases be electronically recorded where feasible and without exception when question occurs at a place of detention. More importantly for Jarrell, the court also reversed the appellate court and held that his confession was not voluntary, but rather was coerced and therefore could not be used against him. Now that the police had to record their interrogations of juveniles, the interrogation room was turned from a black box into a glass house. Now we can see everything. With interrogations being recorded, judges would have a more accurate and reliable record that would be able to conduct nuanced reviews to resolve admissibility issues. There would be no more credibility battles where the outcome was decided before the witness even testified. Now, defense lawyers would be able to play the interrogation videos to challenge misleading or false testimony of the interrogators. Of course, as discussed in part 4 of this book, state-level trial judge and appellate courts are not always willing to conduct nuanced reviews of interrogations. They are still eager to rubber stamp defendants' confessions regardless of interrogation methods used to extract them. Nevertheless, many positive things have come from recording police interrogations, something that Wisconsin now requires even for many adult suspects. Most notably, Dassey's lawyers would never had a fighting chance if not for the numerous hours of recordings. Why? Because no interrogator would ever admit and no judge would ever believe that actually went on behind closed doors if it was not recorded. And this new window into interrogation room also allows a previous impossible show and tell. It was one thing for defense lawyers to try to describe what was happening inside the black box, but now we're able to expose those interrogation tactics with the full light of day, with the superior form of evidence, an audio or video recording, instead of an after-the-fact reconstruction of events by the police detective. We are better able to answer 2 questions. Do suspects falsely confess, and if so, why? Whew. All right, and in the back of the notes for chapter 2, State versus Durrell, and then they give the Wisconsin numbers for that, so you can look them up if you want. Whew. Okay. Number 2, a defendant's prior record can be used against him at trial in several different ways. For example, the mere fact of prior conviction can often be used as impeach the defendant's credibility if he or she testifies at trial. The details of a prior conviction may be used at trial, regardless of whether the defendant testifies simply to demonstrate his or her motive to commit the charged crime or to prove his or her identity as the perpetrator of the charged crime. For example, see Michael C. Cincinnati and Lawrence T. White, convictions based on character. Emicral test of other acts evidence. Florida Law Review 70 in 2018, which discussed multiple ways the defendant's prior conviction can be used at trial. And then, hey Carol. And then 3 through 9 is a bunch of legal notes that you can look up, which I'm not going to repeat back. And then number 10, Wisconsin stats. This statute requires law enforcement to make an audio or audio-visual recording of a custodial interrogations where the interrogator suspect that the suspect committed a felony. However, even for that narrow class of interrogations, there are several exceptions to recording requirement, including when a failure to make a recording was in good faith. Even if none of the good faith exceptions apply, the failure to record an interrogation does not mean the defendant's statement is suppressed or excluded from evidence at trial. The most the defendant would be entitled to is a jury instruction that Wisconsin's policy is to record the interrogation when law enforcement failed to do so, so the jury may consider that when evaluating the evidence. I think if it's a law that you should record the interrogation and they don't record it, I think they should throw it out. The interrogation. But that's just my opinion. Just saying. All right, last chapter. And it's a very short one. And then we'll do questions if anybody has any questions. Chapter 3. People who are innocent don't confess, do they? Do innocent people confess? Of course they do. We all know of real-life examples. False confessions in our part of the world dates back several hundred years when women falsely confessed to being witches in Salem, Massachusetts. As far more contemporary example is the Central Park jogger case, where the police interrogated 5 teenagers and got each one to falsely confess to a brutal rape. In the jogger case, there is no physical evidence against any of the 5 defendants. In fact, the DNA evidence recovered from the victim excluded all of them as suspects. Nevertheless, even with DNA in the defendant's favor, the prosecutor got 5 separate convictions. The only evidence the state had was the defendant's confessions, but that was enough. Fortunately, the boys, now men, were exonerated when the DNA sample was eventually matched to a specific person, the real rapist, who had no connection to the boys and admitted to acting alone when he attacked the victim. Unfortunately, this case is not an anomaly. Of hundreds of wrongful convictions that have been overturned by DNA evidence, a large percentage, nearly 1/3, involving false confessions. This is not surprising. Research has shown that the defendant's confession is the most persuasive piece of evidence a jury will ever hear. Why? Because it is counterintuitive to most jurors that a person would confess to something he didn't do. Therefore, jurors conclude the confession must be true and the defendant must be guilty. But these DNA exonerations are just the tip of the false confession iceberg. The number of criminal convictions involved confessing evidence is incredibly large. However, the number of those cases that involve DNA evidence is incredibly small. Most crimes to which suspects confess are likely the things burglary, theft, reckless behavior of some sort, sexual touching, over the clothing, battery, and disorderly conduct. Crimes that simply do not produce DNA evidence. Rhonda SD, you were late. Pick up your tardy slip and go sit in the back of the class. I'm just joking. Welcome. Hi, Rhonda. How many of these defendants confessed falsely? We'll never know. Without DNA, they will rarely be able to prove their innocence. Therefore, it's unlikely they'll be able to prove their confessions were false. It is very easy to deny or at least ignore this entire line of false confession evidence. For example, Dassey's prosecutor famously told the jury, "People who are innocent don't confess." And if you're a prosecutor, such denial certainly makes it easier to sleep at night. But meanwhile, research psychologists are taking a close look at the phenomenon. Not only are they studying real-life false confessions, but they are also getting test participants, including some well-educated people, to falsely confess in controlled environments. And this leads to our next question. Regardless of whether we are looking at real-life criminal cases or a controlled experiment in a laboratory, why would anyone confess to something he didn't do? The answer to this question is best explained with an analogy. Let's turn our attention to the single largest pool of false confession in the world, the American plea bargaining system. Suppose you're charged with a crime. You're accused of criminally reckless behavior for the manner in which you drove your car. No one was hurt and no property was damaged. Had there been actual harm to a person or property, you would be facing a much wider array of criminal charges. But because you allegedly drove this way with several people in the vicinity, you were charged with 5 counts of felony, second-degree recklessness endangering safety. 1 count for each person you supposedly placed in harm's way. You are facing a maximum possible penalty of 10 years in prison for each count, which could be imposed consecutively, thus exposing you to a possible penalty of 50 years. 50 years! Fortunately for you, even if you were convicted at trial on all counts, the actual sentence would probably be less than this theoretically, but legally permissible maximum 50-year term. You deny driving the matter described in the criminal complaint. You were completely innocent of this alleged conduct. And from an evidence evidentiary standpoint, the prosecutor has a weak case and he knows it. So he immediately offers you the following deal. Plead to one of the 5 felony counts and he'll dismiss the other 4 and recommend 1 year probation with no conditional jail time whatsoever. You discuss this with your attorney, who tells you that pleading to a felony is a serious business. However, the sentence you will actually receive is up to the judge, who may not go for probation. Your attorney also says that for a plea deal to go through, you'll have to admit you're guilty. This judge, like many judges, will not accept a no contest plea, and an innocent person should not plead to a crime he did not commit, your attorney says. You follow your attorney's advice and reject the plea offer. As the trial gets closer, the prosecutor fears having to try this garbage case, a case he could very well lose, yet he still wants, in fact, a conviction for something. Dismissing the entire case at this point would be admitting that his office charges crimes it cannot prove, thus costing defendants and taxpayers a lot of money. So he makes you a much more attractive offer. Plead to 1 negligent-based misdemeanor, not a felony, with a maximum possible sentence of only 9 months in jail, not 50 years in prison. And for the actual sentence, he will recommend a $100 fine, not jail or even probation. To further sweeten the pot, he will recommend to the judge that after a period of 1 year, your conviction should be expunged as long as you aren't convicted of any new crimes. Wow, your attorney was right. Rejecting that first offer was a great call. So you excitedly sit down to discuss this new offer. You're still completely innocent, but the calculus has now changed rather dramatically. The drawback to this new deal is that you still have to plead guilty to a crime, thus admitting guilt for something you didn't do. But on the plus side, you will have saved thousands of dollars in attorney fees, avoid numerous sleepless nights from intense anxiety before and during the multiple-day trial, reduce your maximum possible sentence more than 49 years, reduce your likely sentence from jail or probation to a mere $100 fine, and create the very real chance that your misdemeanor crime will be expunged from your record in only 1 year. You discuss this with your family and it seems like a no-brainer. Take the deal. But why would you falsely confess by saying, I plead guilty in an open and public court to something you didn't do? The answer is simple. After consulting with the criminal defense lawyer who is looking out for you, discussing the plea bargain with your family, and carefully weighing out your options, you determined that admitting guilt to something you didn't do was in your best interest. Maybe you made the right decision. Maybe the judge imposed the $100 fine or a $250 fine to teach you a harsher lesson, sent you on your way, and even expunged your criminal record in 1 year down the road. Maybe it didn't work out that way you had hoped. Maybe the judge decided that a fine in any amount was too lenient for a person who put a human life in harm's way. After all, you did confess by pleading guilty to the reduced charge. So instead, maybe the judge gave you 1 year of probation, 30 days of conditional jail time, and a much heftier $500 fine just for good measure. The point is that regardless of whether, in hindsight, your decision to admit guilt was a good one, you made that decision because at the time you believed it was in your best interest. The same thing is true of admitting guilt in the interrogation room. Suspects do because they believe that at the time their decision to falsely confess is in their best interest. But how can that be? It's such a stupid decision. That's true. The decision to confess to an interrogation room is a stupid one, but it's not a surprising one. Defendants who decide to plead guilty in court do so after consulting with their lawyers, talking the decision over with their families, and taking the time to think carefully about their opinions or options. The suspect is in the interrogation room, has no lawyer. Instead, he is being consulted by police detectives who are trained to lie to him and convince him that he will be far better off if he confesses to them. And the detectives who do this after isolating the suspect from family and friends and making sure he doesn't have the information, the support, or the time to rationally consider this true options. As demonstrated above, the context of a false confession in court, in the form of a guilty plea, It is dramatically different from the context of a false confession in the interrogation room. It is not surprising, therefore, that when a defendant falsely confesses in court by pleading guilty, he is sometimes making a bad decision. However, when a suspect falsely confesses in the interrogation room, he is nearly always making a bad decision. We saw in the above example how a defense attorney can convince a client, often correctly so, that falsely confessing in open and public court is in the client's best interest. But how do interrogators convince Dassey that falsely confessing to them, without talking to an attorney for advice or discussing the decision with his family, was in his best interest? That's what much of this book is about. It will expose and explain the numerous interrogation tactics that Wiegert and Fassbender used to convince and isolate inexperienced 16-year-old child to confess to a crime of rape, murder, and mutilating a corpse. But before we explore these interrogation room tactics, we will first cover a few pre-interrogation tricks. With the right preparation and setup, the interrogators can win the battle before they even step into the battlefield. And that's the end of part 1. Let's go to the back here. Chapter 3 notes. We have bunch of resources from different cases that he based that analogy off of, so, and other things. So we've got James R. Arrogid, the admissibly a false confession expert testimony, course to confess the psychology of false confessions from awareness to reform, facts and figures. That's an article, an empirical base for admission of expert testimony on false confessions, Arizona State Law Journal, Making a Murderer, aired December, so that was actually something from the director's notes. Investigating true and false confessions within a novel experiment paradigm. Just a bunch of state law and then state law statutes. So anyway, that's what those notes are. Anybody in the chat have any questions or comments or anything about what we just read? Yeah, it was about an hour. That's what I thought it would be for 3 chapters. Here's a question for you guys, just to ask you guys a question. Let's say you guys were in that scenario with the car and they wanted to charge you with reckless endangerment. And they offered you a plea like the lawyer plead down to. So the last final plea of you'll get $100 fine and no probation, no jail time, and then it'll be expunged from your record after a year, but you have to plead guilty. Would you guys take that plea, or would you still say, no, I'm going to fight this in court? The original charge was reckless endangerment. I think 10 counts of it, or 5 counts of it. Hold on, let me. You're accused of criminally reckless behavior for the manner in which you drove your car. Nobody was harmed. You're charged with 5 counts of felony, second-degree reckless endangering safety. and you'll get 1 count for each person you supposedly placed in harm's way, which there was 5 people, they say, so you could have been charged up to that could be each separate charge consecutively, so that could be up to 50 years in prison, because the max is 10 years per person, I guess, that you put in harm's way. Would you That's what, if you went to court and you were to fight that in court, that's what you would be facing. But the prosecutor offered you the plea. Yeah. Well, okay, so let's take Brendan's thing then. If you were in Brendan's shoes and you had to plead guilty to rape, mutilation of a body, and murder, and you would have to testify at your uncle's trial, because that's what you would have had to have done. And you would have to spend 15 years in prison, and you would still be registered as a sex offender when you came out. Would you take that plea? If you knew you were innocent. Hey, Linda. I mean, logically, if he took the plea and he went through all of that, he would be out by now. Yeah, he would be out by now. He would, but at what cost though? Because he would have to testify against Stephen. The family would probably disown him because of that. Probably not his mom or brothers or dad, but the rest of the family. Causing friction with everybody. He would have to basically live with that title for the rest of his life. I mean, granted, he could fight it in prison still. I mean, he could still fight it, but it would be even more harder to fight. It's really hard for Brendan to fight because he has a false confession, but it's nearly impossible if you take a plea to fight that, because you're basically admitting guilt. So not only do you have a confession, but you took a plea. That means you're admitting guilt. You would probably never never be exonerated from that crime. You would have to live with that for the rest of your life. You would be called a rapist and a murderer. I mean, he already is in some aspects, I guess, but this is more well, why would you? Not only did you admit to it in a confession, but you also, pled out. You admit to it in court. How do we know you know what I mean? I don't know. It's so hard to answer that, because logically you look at it from one way, you're like, well, 15 years in prison is better than the rest of your life. Right. Nobody's being judged here, whatever answer you would think of. Nobody's being judged here. It's an individual question for each person. Brendan chose no. He said no. I think even his mom said it in the documentary. Don't admit to something you didn't do. If you're saying you're innocent, then we'll fight that. And I would say the same thing if that was my kid. If you think you're innocent, if you know you're innocent and you didn't do something, then I'll fight with you. Not fight with you, but fight for you. You know what I mean? I would be totally like that too. But it is something I do think about too. I do think about that. would you be able to stand though? You as a person though, would you be able to stand in court at any age and admit to a crime you didn't do just so you could plead down and get the lesser? I don't think I could do it. I don't think I could do it at all. I think I'm too stubborn. I think I'm absolutely too stubborn and hard-headed. I think I would be like, "No, F you, F you, F you." And I ain't admitting to something I didn't do. And then I'd flip off the court. You know, I don't think I would admit to something I didn't do. I couldn't. I'm too argumentative. Like, ask anybody that knows me. I'd argue with you before I admit that that I did something that I didn't do. There's so much evidence of false confessions true. I set highlighted papers to Evers. There's much evidence. Illinois was the first state to ban lying juveniles interrogation. Yes, they were. That's a question I always ask Governor Evers. Why are you guys allowing innocent children to be lied to in interrogations? Yes, I am too. I am hard-headed. Ask my mother. Ask anybody that knows me. Oh man, I would argue with you and over anything, anything. But I couldn't stand in court and say, "Yeah, I'm guilty of something." I would say it in such a way that I'd be like, "Yeah, sure, I'll take a plea to something even though I'm not guilty of it," which is bullshit. Yeah, we've had many talks. Yeah. Linda knows me well. Yeah, I don't think I could do it. I'd rather, I mean, I say this without having anything on the line as far as my life goes. I'm not convicted, and it could be completely different when you're actually standing there facing these things. I mean, we could all talk the talk, but it's different when we're actually there, and it would also be different if I had, you know, kids or a family that I was providing for, and I had to think of their best interests too. You got to think of it like that too. If I had kids in a family that I mean, I have my parents, but I'm paying my bills, but you know what I mean? It's just different scenarios for different peoples, and it would be a little bit different if I had that kind of a scenario where, um, I had to take care of a family and I can't spend the rest of my life in prison. I got to pay bills and take care of children, but I don't have that. And Brendan didn't have that, but he was a kid. So you got to look at it from his perspective of spending the rest of his life in prison. And what's the rest of his life? He doesn't even understand that concept yet. He's still just a kid, but he still, decided to stand up and say, no, I didn't do this and I'm going to fight it. And he did. And in the future, it probably will benefit him because then they can say, well, he didn't take a plea deal, so he didn't admit guilt, even though he has this false confession, you know. Oh, lying to juveniles is on the petition. Is there a petition out there about lying? Can you send it to me through Messenger and I'll share it in chat because that is a petition I'd sign. There's a lot of petitions going out there, and I'm not saying you shouldn't sign them, but I think that there's two main petitions that I would sign that I would concentrate my efforts on, and that's the Brendan's law that they're basically trying to pass, that Barb created, what was it, 5 years ago, that she still posts to this day, that That's one act. It's on the website, the tree link that I have. That one. And then the other one, which is the other one, which is the one that the lawyers created for Governor Evers, asking for Governor Evers to free Brendan. Do I think that Brendan would make the same choice today? I don't know. I mean, Brendan, as the situation that he's in right now, sitting in prison, I know he just wants to go home. That's all he wants. He doesn't want money or anything. He just wants to go home. But would he accept guilt? I don't know. It's hard. It's hard. What, when he leaves prison, what will his record be? Let's say, he doesn't get exonerated of everything, and he would be registered as a sex offender. He would have murder and mutilation of a corpse. If he were like, let's say they were like, okay, you served enough time, you can go. You know, you're still guilty and everything, but you've done your time, you've done your sentence that we feel adequate, you can go. There's a word for it, I can't remember what it's called, but he would still have to register as, as a sex offender, and he would still have the charges, which is the murder and mutilation of corpse and all that. So that would be what hit. Now, unless he was exonerated, then he would have nothing. His record would be clean. Not a dumb question. There's no such things as dumb questions. But yeah, that would follow him around forever. So it would follow him around if he took a plea deal too. If he took a plea deal, all that stuff would follow him around still. And what's worse is it would be harder to fight that stuff because you admitted that to guilt. You took the plea. Let me see. Did she send me the link? No. I'll have to post it. You'll have to post it in the group. When Stephen was up for parole in his original, they wouldn't give it unless he admitted guilt. Is that what happened? When, yeah, that's exactly what's going to happen. The whole idea of parole. So Stephen was sentenced to, what was it, like 20 years in prison, but he could be out in parole in like 2 or 3 years. And in many states, you basically have to, when you go in front of the parole board, you have to, you basically have to show remorse for your crime. You have to admit that you did the crime, you show remorse for it, you say, I'm sorry. You do things in prison too that show that you show remorse for the crime. Like, if you're convicted of a sex crime, you go through classes and stuff that they offer for sex that kind of stuff, anger management, all sorts of different stuff, and you have to pay for it all too. It's not free, of course. But anyway, and then you go in front of your parole board and you basically say, yeah, I did the crime. I'm extremely sorry. I did these things in prison to make the best use of my time. and I working towards being a better person in society, and I'm really sorry for what I did. And then the parole board will look at history in prison and all that, and then they'd make a decision. And if they feel that you learned your lesson basically, then they'll let you go early. So that's the thing with Steven is that he didn't do any of that the first time around, because if you even take those classes, then you're admitting guilt in a way. And he, I didn't rape Penny Bernstein, so why should I admit to something I didn't do even to get out? So he just didn't play that game with the parole board. And unfortunately, that's going to be the same case for Brendan. He's gonna go in front of the parole board, and he's gonna have that same option. Do you show remorse for your crime? Well, I didn't do the crime. I'm innocent. Okay, well, there you go. I don't know if it's a legal thing in Wisconsin, like you legally have to admit guilt and show remorse for your crime for the parole board, or if it's just the thing that the parole board likes or standard. Because I don't know, could the parole board in 2048, God willing, Brendan's out by then, but could they take mercy on Brendan and say, look, this kid, he's just an innocent kid at the time, and whatever, we'll still release him no matter what he says? Maybe, I don't know. Okay, yeah, see, in Wisconsin you do. In Minnesota you don't. So, yeah, just, it's the really shitty and heartbreaking. I don't even want to think about it, to be honest with you. I think you have to admit guilt, Carrie. Still admit guilt. It's another fucking game that they play on you. To innocent people in prison. It's just another game. But yeah. So on that very sad, depressing note, I'm gonna go. Yeah. If anybody else has any questions or anything that they'd like, or if you want here's the link tree for all the links and stuff that I have, and it has the petitions and all that stuff that I endorse and support. So it's got the petition for Brendan Dassey Juvenile Interrogation Protection Law, which is the one Mom set up. It's got the petition to Wisconsin for Tony Evers, which is basically the lawyer's website. It's got also other links in there too if you want to check out some other stuff like Linda's channel, my Twitter, my Etsy account, which is pretty dead, and stuff like that. But if anybody also has any other, like for instance, Under Your Scars, I know she's looking for that link for that petition she was telling us about. I'm going to check it out, and if it looks good, I'll add it to it too. And if there's anything, by the way, you guys see or that might be missing from that link that you have a suggestion for, go ahead and shoot me a message and I'll throw it on there. I want to make it as informational for Brendan's stuff as possible. So anything you guys can think of that would be helpful for Brendan in any way, don't be afraid to shoot me a message. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed my reading, and I'll be back Monday to read some more. What time in Discord? Tomorrow, normally it's at, I would say 8:30 my time, and which is Arizona time. Oh, here. Oh, see, that's the website. Oh, see, the past Brendan Dassey Juvenile Interrogation Protection Law. That's still that's the one that his mom made. Here, I'll just go ahead and post this in the chat. Yeah, so tomorrow I actually, like, I hate to be that person, but I actually have like a busy day tomorrow morning. I have a doctor's appointment right after work, but it shouldn't take that long, and as soon as I'm done with that, I'll pop in the voice, and you'll see everybody in there. So yeah, that's what. Yeah, I usually will make an announcement when I go in there. I'll tag everybody and say, hey, I'm in voice, and then if you guys want to go head over there. But tomorrow I might be a little bit late heading into voice because of that. But I'm usually in voice between, I'd say, 8:30, and I try to stay until like at least 11. It just depends on how well that Benadryl starts kicking in for me. So, yeah. If you guys see you there tomorrow, and then Wednesday, be having my Wednesday morning check-up, check-in, whatever I call it, and then rinse and repeat for the week. So I hope everyone stays good. Have a safe day, and go do something out there positive for Brendan. Maggie has been doing what she calls Brendan blessings, which I think are an amazing idea, where she does something good for another person, and then she explains to that person that she's doing a Brendan blessing, and then explains who Brendan is. And she has these little cards that she made up that she posted in our group. I'll have to post them in Discord too. You guys can print them out and use those to do the Brendan blessings. And I think with Maggie's okay, I'm gonna do a event thing for it, because I'm planning on every March I try to do something for Brendan on the anniversary of his arrest, because that's the day basically that changed everything, right? He was arrested March 1st, and he hasn't been home since. So every March for the last few years, I try to do something in honor of Brendan. One year we did the wristbands and then the tattoos, and now we're doing the postcards. Or we did the postcards. So maybe this March we'll do Brendan blessings. We'll do where people go out there and do something. They can print out that card, and then they'll do something on March 1st in honor of Brendan. Maybe we'll do something like that. So yeah, October 19th is also his birthday. That's true. I was thinking of something we can do for that too. So maybe we can do Brendan blessings on that day too. I wanted to do something else too, like maybe, I don't know, maybe make a special postcard and send it out to everybody so everyone can have a special postcard that we can be sending into. Maybe that's what I'll do. We can make like a special postcard, and for his birthday and for March 1st, where I can have them all sent out. I need to get on the ball then and get those out and get that going. Because this October is coming up and I want you all to have that before October. So I'll be planning that tonight. An online one with personal greetings, print and send. Yeah, there you go. Under your scars. That's thinking. Maybe that's what I'll do. And then have you guys just print it out. And all you guys have to do is get cardstock from like Walmart. Ship it out. Yeah. You guys are smart. I'm glad I have you. All right. Well, I'm going to go. But I hope everyone has a great day. And I will be talking to you all Tuesday when we can do a lot of that. And yeah. You guys are cute, Maggie. Yeah, I definitely want to utilize Brendan blessings. But yeah, do a Brendan blessing today for the holiday. Do a Brendan blessing with your family. Go out there, pay for somebody's lunch or help somebody pick up something or take in your neighbor's newspaper. I love you, Linda. I could do that. We could do something like that too. We can think of something like that. I'll think about that and see how we can do that easily. But yeah. All right, guys. Take care. Excuse me. I burped. Where is it? Is it right here? Yeah. Okay. Bye.